Braves and baseball fans, it's time to take a trip from coast to coast across Major League Baseball.
There it goes, a long drive. If it stays fair, home run.
One strike away. Sandy into his windup. Here's the pitch. Swung on and missed a perfect game.
Fly ball deep left center. Grissom on the run. Yes! Yes! The Atlanta Braves have given you a championship. Listen to this crowd.
Left side, Swanson to first. Braves are world champions.
Braves and baseball talk, straight from the diamond.
Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer on your home today. And Window Nation. Call the pros at Window Nation at 866-90Nation.
Here's Grant McAuley.
Hello and welcome to From the Diamond. I am Grant McAuley. These are the Kia Studios of Sports Radio 92.9 The Game on a Sunday afternoon. Heading into Sunday evening, the Braves are all done with their homestand. It wasn't exactly what they were hoping for. Some trouble with the Arizona Diamondbacks over the weekend, but able to salvage the finale on Sunday. So they're able to get out of town a little bit better than had they not been able to figure out at least one more win on this homestand, which started out in a pretty promising way, taking a series from the New York Mets, which is may not sound like altogether that much, especially if you look at the standings, but the Braves, for whatever reason, were having all kinds of trouble with the Mets. Instead, they were having all kinds of trouble on Friday and Saturday against Arizona, but able to sort some things out on Sunday. Bryce Elder with a nice bounce-back start, and that man was at it again. That man is Matt Olson. Matt Olson continues to make, I think, a case for the National League MVP award, and I'm not the only one thinking that. I'm not the only one saying that. Just about everybody's saying it at this point. It's going to be an uphill climb, as we've talked about the last few weeks, as he's really been heating up, powering the Braves offense, that, there's some difficulty with that guy in Los Angeles, that he's not just happy with hitting, he's got to pitch too. And so Shohei Ohtani already kind of handicaps the entire idea of being able to win the MVP in whatever league he's in. But even putting him aside, Pete Crow-Armstrong of the Chicago Cubs is having an outstanding season as well. But Matt Olson's got himself on the short list at this point. There's 5 or 6 more weeks of baseball left to be played here, right? Or 6 more weeks, I guess, to be most accurate. He can continue to add to that case. Those guys will continue to add to their case as well. But anytime you're receiving MVP votes, you know you're doing a lot of things right. And let me tell you, Matt Olson doing a ton of things right. And how about swinging at 3-0 pitches in tie games today? That was the big moment. You needed one. You needed somebody to give you a jolt because offensively speaking, the Braves' bats really were under wraps. They were shut out with Chris Sale on the mound on Friday, and then they got bombed by the Diamondbacks on Saturday in a 10-3 loss. And then you come into Sunday's game, and you got your old friend Michael Soroka on the mound. Not really able to do a whole lot against him, a little bit, but a low-scoring affair again. And it just kind of felt like one of those games where you were sitting around and you were waiting for the big hit, and who's going to give you the big hit? Well, the answer is rhetorical at this point. It is Matt Olson. Matt Olson's been the guy. He's been doing it for a while, and it's good to see, and I'll take all the home runs you can get if you're talking about what you need out of a guy that's supposed to be power in the middle of your lineup, but a couple of guys on base here too. Matt Olson can drive in some runs, but you got to do a better job of setting the table. I feel like that was something the Braves were struggling a little bit with, at least in opportunities for Matt, is just getting some guys on. Here lately, that's been a little bit tougher. Since the All-Star break, the Braves offense has certainly figured out some of the things that were wrong, that were ailing them in the month of June. But here, as we got into August, and maybe a little bit on this homestand more so, it just started to get a little bit quieter than you needed to get. And especially when you're trying to sort out some things on the pitching side, which we're going to talk about quite a bit on the show. Yeah, you would like the offense to maybe just take the lead, quite literally, and help your pitching staff just kind of settle in and enjoy itself a little bit on the average day. But nothing comes easy in this league, I can promise you that. They may look like when you're staring at the calendar or staring at the schedule like, oh, this one should be a win. This should be a series win. This should be a win. And nobody likes to lose. And I can tell you, the commentary and the feedback that I get or that I see online afterwards, yeah, nobody loves losing. We're not breaking any news here. But you also have to remember there's 162 of these things, and you will drive yourself nuts if you're going to dwell on every single one the way that you would on, what happened on Sunday to my favorite football team? Well, sometimes nothing good. You got to sit on that one for 5, 6, 7 days. The baseball team, they just got to dust themselves off, come back in the next day and try again. And that's kind of the beauty of the sport. And the Braves, not the weekend that they wanted, but able to salvage the finale against the Arizona Diamondbacks. Another club that I might add that has postseason aspirations and that is continuing to fight for one of those National League wildcard spots. The Braves, meanwhile, are continuing to try to set up shop and stay at the top of the National League East, obviously. And they're also trying to do a little something else that's mighty important, and that is have one of the two best records in the National League. And they are about to have, and we'll talk about this as the show goes along as well, not one, but two tests, two opportunities to really take a big step towards securing one of those top two records. And what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about a head-to-head against both the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Milwaukee Brewers, who have the best record in all of baseball. Brewers are 76-48 as of this show. Last 10, they are 5-5. Los Angeles Dodgers, meanwhile, are tied with the Atlanta Braves at 74-50. You want to guess what both those teams have done the last 10 games? Yeah, they're 5-5. So this thing is just not moving very much. But if you got head-to-head matchups coming up, which the Braves do, they're going to be facing the Milwaukee Brewers on this upcoming road trip. Then they're going to get an off day and they're going to come home, and the Dodgers are going to be waiting for them at Truist Park. Somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose, and those standings are going to move around a little bit. But as of right now, it is the Milwaukee Brewers who have just that slight advantage over the Braves as far as best overall record in baseball and in the National League. As you get towards playoff time and you start to look at that playoff seeding, those top two spots are the ones that get to bye. They do not have to play in that wild card round, and I promise you, you don't want to have to go through that 3-game potential exercise and then have to figure out what you're going to do in the National League Division Series. And I think when we start to talk about the Braves pitching, this is where it becomes most important, most strategic, and just paramount for this club that you are able to skip out on those 3 games that are going to be happening in the wild card round before you get to the NLDS. Because if we think about what that schedule looks like, well, who are you going to be throwing in those games? You're going to have to throw Chris Sale, and you're going to have to throw Tyler Mahle or Martin Perez or Bryce Elder or A.J. Smith-Shawver. We got to talk about where he fits into this whole thing. Whoever it is you're choosing, you're going to be firing some of your best arms to try to get through that quick series. And then you got a 5-gamer, and you're going to be looking at the back half of your rotation. Now, all of a sudden, who's starting Game 1 and Game 2 of the National League Division Series, potentially? Now, there will be some travel days built in there, but not much is built in between the Wild Card Series and that National League Division Series. And you know why? Because they don't want the wild card teams to necessarily get the opportunity to have a full reset, to be able to have any kind of advantage over the teams that have the best record and get to play at home and get to skip out on that series. So that's my TED Talk on how the playoffs look and what the Braves need to do to get there, and we'll get into more detail as we go along. But it's obvious as you go through this stretch of the season for the Braves, who have now played 124 games, so they got 38 games left. And if I saw correctly, coming into this series against the Diamondbacks, the Braves have one of the toughest remaining schedules of any team in baseball, and certainly any team in the National League. The composite record for teams the Braves are going to be facing now that this Arizona series is over and heading into the end of September is about .530 as far as winning percentage is concerned. So you're going to be facing some clubs that they're used to winning, and it's not going to be some kind of cakewalk. And a team with a .530-ish winning percentage, they're about 8 games over 500. So if you're wondering, well, what is a .530 as opposed to a .500? Well, that's about what it is. And over the course of a long season, obviously that kind of stuff adds up. But the Braves are holding off the Philadelphia Phillies in the National League East race. The Phillies, last 10 games, want to guess what their record is? Yeah, it's 5-5. Everybody's just going to play some .500 baseball right now. But you still have 7 head-to-head matchups against the Phillies. So the opportunity for things to get a little bit crazy, get a little bit chaotic down the stretch is definitely out there. So you still have to handle your business. You still have to win some very important series, even if the other team, and we talked about this last week here on From the Diamond, the Phillies, if they want to win the division, if the Braves basically were to play .500 the rest of the way, I think the Phillies have to play nearly .800 baseball. I mean, it's an absurd run that they would have to go on just to catch Atlanta with an 8-game lead as you head into the middle point of the month of August. So, yeah, the math is on your side, but there's a lot of work to be done in order to be in the position that you want to be in once you get to the playoffs. But the least of the division winners still has to play in that wild card round. So I stress again how important it'll be to see how the Braves are going to finish. I know there's that old saying, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. Well, in baseball, it's how you do basically everything. It's how you start, it's what you do in the middle there, and it's what you do at the end. I remember Bobby Cox saying this when I was breaking into the business. This was back in 2005. You're going to win 54, you're going to lose 54. It's what happens in those other 54 that are going to tell the story of your season. And he's probably not the only person that said that, but he's the one that I heard say it. And he knew a thing or two and had been through a few of, as the saying goes in baseball, and the Braves like to say this a lot, have been through the wars. certainly understand how important it is to have that consistency throughout the course of the season. Bobby Cox knew a little bit about that. And the Braves have been trying to play a consistent brand of baseball. But some of the things that we're wanting to dive into when it comes to where the Braves are here in 2026 anyway, is this upcoming road trip. 7 games, but 4 cities. Because the Braves have to go to Minnesota, and they then have to stop for 1 game in Chicago, have to make that one up against the White Sox. They'll also play the Milwaukee Brewers, but they're going to take a little side quest over to Williamsport where they'll play that Little League Classic. So 7 games, 4 cities for the Atlanta Braves on this upcoming road trip. That's something that's going to be just a little bit different than you normally see. And those are the kind of weird scheduling quirks that can also wreak havoc on what should have been a 6-game, 2-city road trip. All of a sudden became a 7-game, 4-city road trip because of some weather and because you're playing in one of those, special event games. We saw the Field of Dreams game this past week, and that was a pretty fun one. I'm interested to see what this Little League Classic deal will be about. And obviously the Speedway Classic we saw last year. I don't know if I ever need to see that again, but we did see it. If you wondered if you could put a baseball field in the middle of the infield of a NASCAR track, you can. Should you? That's the question. It's like Jurassic Park. They were so busy trying to figure out if they could do it, they didn't think, should we do this? And the rain certainly told us, we'd rather you not do that. Because that's some of the worst field conditions I think I've seen in a Major League Baseball game. But be that as it may, we're going to talk a lot about what's going on with the Braves, some of the particulars. This has become a common thread here. We're going to continue talking about it week after week after week because Matt Olson continues to deliver for this team and is very much putting himself in the MVP discussion in the National League. You look overall, Olson hit his 36th home run of the year on Sunday, a 3-run shot that broke a 2-2 tie and sent the Braves to victory. He is now one of the leading home run hitters in all of baseball. He had, at one point, a couple of days ago, had tied for that home run lead, but I believe Kyle Schwarber and Yordan Alvarez have also been busy hitting home runs. Those are a couple of guys that are at the top of that leaderboard as well. But for Olson, leading the National League in slugging percentage, that's no small thing. Up over 550 now after his 3-run homer on Sunday. He's also leading the National League in doubles for the 2nd consecutive year. So it's just very quietly, there are things that are on Matt Olson's resume, both in 2026 and beyond, that just continue to, I don't know if surprise you is the right thing, but it kind of sneaks up on you. Maybe it's you're hearing more about other guys. And if you look at the Atlanta Braves, right, and you look at the lineup coming into the year, I think a lot of people, you say, okay, who is going to be the barometer for success for this lineup? For so many years, the answer to that question has been Ronald Acuna Jr. And I'm not saying that Ronald is not a huge factor all of a sudden. I'm not trying to be a prisoner of the moment or have what we like to call in the business recency bias, which most people don't realize when they're dealing in that. But I'm trying to have some self-awareness here. But the answer can change at times, and especially when someone's doing the kinds of things for as long and consistently as Matt Olson has done them this year. Leading the National League in doubles, plus his 36 home runs now on the year. He's got a chance for a 40-double, 40-homer season, and the only other Brave to do that, I believe, was Hank Aaron. Now, you start putting yourself on a list with Hank Aaron, I don't really care who you are or what you've done or what it is you've accomplished. It's got to be good, right? And in this case, it would be quite good. Olson is still on pace for, I believe, about 46 home runs. As he's played every single game, he's got 38 games left to continue to add to that. We'll look at the game log and see just over the last 38 games what exactly Matt Olson has done. We'll throw in Sunday as well. Obviously, he hit a 3-run homer in this one. Last 39 games coming in. 16 home runs in his last 39 games. So is it possible for Matt Olson to hit 50 home runs again? It absolutely is. That's on the table. He's got 38 games left, and he's hit 15 in his last 39 games. Or, if you want to round up, 16 in his last 40. So all he needs is 14 more. All you need is 14 more to hit 50. That sounds like a ridiculous saying because it is. But Matt Olson putting together some really, really impressive work today. And there was also another interesting thing that was going on with the Braves lineup that it kind of caught my attention. I know I heard it talked about on the broadcast as well, is that the Braves were not walking in this series. Like, they did not want to walk. And that doesn't surprise me because I've also looked at hitting tendencies and tenets of the Atlanta Braves. And as a team, they love jumping on the first pitch, being aggressive, finding something to hit. You might only notice it when things go wrong, but I can tell you it goes way more right than wrong, and I'll get back to that in just a moment. But the Braves, before an intentional walk to Matt Olson, in I believe the 5th inning of Sunday's game, had gone 108 plate appearances combined without drawing a single walk. And when they broke the streak, of course, it was an intentional walk. So how much longer would that have gone on? I don't really know. But it's kind of a crazy thing to think about that an entire team could go that long. It's basically, 27 outs is what you got to get in a game. But typically, if you have an okay day where you do draw a handful of walks and you've got 7, 8, 9 hits, you're going to have about high 30s to maybe low 40s in total plate appearances as a team in the average Major League Baseball game. So it's about 2.5 games worth of not walking whatsoever, especially when those plate appearances are not covered. So it really tracked back a little further than that. But before we get lost in all the semantics, I did want to go back to why it is the Braves are such an aggressive team early in the count. Because I just looked at a lot of at-bats, and I know a lot of people have pointed this out. You're not working counts. You're not putting the pitcher on his heels. You're not making him come to you. So why exactly is it that this team just continues to go after the first pitch? Well, let me tell you why. As a team, the Braves are hitting .346 with an OPS of nearly .950 as a team on the first pitch. They have 29 first-pitch homers as well. As far as any particular single pitch count, first pitch is pretty much where the Braves like to do a lot of their business. 40 doubles, 29 homers, hitting nearly .350 with a .950 OPS on the first pitch. So I had to at least satisfy my own curiosity. In a 1-0 count, the Braves are hitting .355. So if you do happen to miss wildly, there's a good chance that they're going to be looking at that second pitch you're going to throw them if you're behind in the count. On an 0-1 pitch, the Braves are still hitting .277. So they're looking to swing early in counts. They're not looking to necessarily get deep in those counts. So there can be this line between, is the team too aggressive? Is the team not aggressive enough? And that latter thing may not sound like something that could really be the case that often, but I can promise you that it is. But for Matt Olson and the Braves, they're doing damage on the first pitch, and they're doing damage on 3-0 pitches. I was curious about that one, so I had to go look that one up. On 3-0 pitches this year, the Braves are batting .343, and Matt Olson hit the 4th home run on a 3-0 pitch. So some pretty good stuff happening on some of these particular counts, but that's just kind of an offshoot of the overall approach I was looking at from the team and just seeing that maybe it was at its most extreme that it's been at any point this season. But I was curious about the Braves overall in terms of how often does this team take a walk? Would you believe they're 28th in Major League Baseball? I did not expect them to be that far down the list of overall walks. But if you start to balance things out the other way on this ledger, the Braves came in 6th in Major League Baseball in runs scored. The Braves were also 2nd in the National League and 4th in Major League Baseball in home runs. So they're scoring runs, they're hitting homers, they're not necessarily walking. Who's to say what the best version of the offense is? Probably a little bit of balance. Maybe a few more walks would mean a few more runs. I don't know. But top 6 teams in Major League Baseball in runs scored, this also got me. They're all in the National League. Every single one of them, which surprised me. And then I looked at the names. The Nationals, who, again, are sitting in 4th place in the National League East, are still the top scoring team in baseball. That is a team that can mash. Then you got the Cubs, obviously, a playoff caliber club. You got the very improved Pittsburgh Pirates, are 3rd in Major League Baseball in runs scored. Then you find the Dodgers, the Brewers, and the Braves, the teams with the best record in the league, and in Major League Baseball for that matter. And then you find the Chicago White Sox. The White Sox are the highest scoring team in the American League. I bring that up in part because the Braves are going to see them for one game on this upcoming 7-game road trip, and the White Sox have taken firm control of the American League Central. So it wasn't that long ago we were talking about the Sox as a club that, they're going to lose 100 games every year until when? When are they going to turn it around? Are they going to be the worst team in Major League Baseball record-wise? These were the conversations you were having around the Chicago White Sox. Now, all of a sudden, they have sorted out quite a few things and figured out a way to be a much better version of themselves, and quite obviously have got themselves in line for the possibility of getting into the postseason. But as much as I talk about Matt Olson kind of being that standard bearer right now and the guy that's delivering for the Atlanta Braves, I still think that if you're looking for one player that you need to see the most from over the next 6 weeks and obviously all the way through October, it's got to be Ronald Acuna Jr. And that's not a shocking statement. That shouldn't surprise anybody. This is a guy that you look at as one of the superstars of baseball. When he's healthy, when he's going right, he's one of the 3 or 4 best players in the game. But this season, there have just been so many peaks and valleys for Ronald Acuna Jr., and he just really hasn't seemed to get consistently to the level that he was even at times last year when he came back from the knee injury. A year ago, Acuna batted .290 with a .935 OPS. He hit 21 homers and did all that in 95 games. So I just kind of figured, all right, he's come back, he's healthy, he's going to be looking good, but he's had to deal with the hamstring thing twice this year. That's cost him over 50 games thus far this year. But Ronald in 71 games, 13 homers, just 31 runs knocked in, and hitting just .244 coming into Sunday. And he did not get a run against Michael Soroka on Sunday, broke a tie. I mean, you want to see those kind of hits. And he has been, I think, powering up a little bit here lately at least. But it's just been a real slog for Ronald Acuna Jr. overall. Here in the month of August, batting .264, he does have 5 home runs. He's knocked in 8 runs. And I don't know how long and to what end Walt Weiss will continue to alternate the leadoff spot between Acuna and Drake Baldwin. I understand why he's doing it, and I've heard him explain it a number of different times. I get why, because of all the left-handed hitters. But I also have seen Ronald Acuna Jr. year after year excel in the leadoff spot. And he does have some speed, and yes, he may need to be more judicious on the base paths, but he just seems like an ideal leadoff hitter still at this point. And Drake Baldwin, to me, honestly seems like the ideal number 2 hitter. So the question, I think, becomes at that point, if you're batting Matt Olson third, if you can have a right-handed hitter that could really do the work at cleanup, but Ozzie Albies has really faded. And this kind of brings the discussion back again to what you haven't gotten from Austin Riley, though as we will talk about coming up, it has improved at least somewhat here in the second half. He's looking a lot more like himself. But not having that, I think, has destabilized the lineup. And even with a career year from Michael Harris II that he's putting together this year, there's still some question marks about, I guess, what order is best for this Braves lineup and what will make them the best version of themselves. And they've got 6 weeks to kind of figure this whole thing out before they get to October, when you very much want to know what the best version of your lineup is, and you very much want to come in with a little bit of momentum and feeling like you're clicking on all cylinders. And I don't know that the Braves offense necessarily, even though they are 6th in Major League Baseball in runs and one of the top home run hitting clubs in baseball, I don't know that they've ever really, truly hit their stride. And there have been a lot of weird things that have gone on. They haven't gotten a lot of production out of left field. They've had to solve that. Shortstop has been a revolving door of multiple players. We talked about Austin Riley having a down year. Behind the plate, Drake Baldwin has been great. He has missed some time. They've been trying to figure out things on the backup catcher front for a while. They got Sean Murphy back finally. See if Sean can get that back going, because what he does behind the plate is invaluable. But you like to see a little offense coming from him as well, and you like to have healthy Ronald Acuna Jr. over there in right field. Even if you got Matt Olson out there playing every day, you still got some things to sort out, to figure out in order to get this lineup running in its optimal form. And we'll get into that shortstop discussion coming up here as we continue. This is From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
Talking Braves and beyond.
Baseball
With From the Diamond.
Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer on your home today. And Window Nation. Call the pros at Window Nation at 866-90-NATION. Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back in to From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. We continue. It's a Sunday. Braves have wrapped up their 3-game series with the Arizona Diamondbacks. Now they'll get out on the road. They will have 4 cities in 7 days. It still sounds weird to say it, but that's what they got coming up. They got 3 with the Minnesota Twins. They got 1 with the White Sox. They got 3 with the Brewers, but they have 1 game in a Williamsport where they'll be playing a Little League Classic game that Major League Baseball has lined up. So the Braves will be very busy. They're very in demand, and they will have racked up some frequent flyer miles by the time they come home. And when they do, they will get an off day. But on the other side of that off day is the Los Angeles Dodgers paying a visit to Truist Park. So it's going to get very interesting here in very short order when you get the Brewers with the best record in baseball and the Dodgers and Braves now neck and neck for second best record in Major League Baseball. And more to the point, for the playoff seeding, some very, very interesting things happening over the next 10, 11 days for the Atlanta Braves. So some very important baseball still to be talked about as we continue on here on From the Diamond. But one of the things that I think everybody's kind of been looking at and wondering about and trying to make heads or tails of is what is going on at shortstop for the Atlanta Braves. And not because it's something that has an immediate and obvious answer, but just because you were hoping to have this thing, I think, sorted out and just feel a little bit better about the consistency from that position. And how exactly did it become inconsistent? Well, injury was what started it, and that was the first domino that fell. The Braves re-signed Ha-Seong Kim, who was claimed on waivers from the Tampa Bay Rays a year ago and was pretty solid in September. He went into the offseason, didn't have a multi-year offer, so he came back to the Braves for 1 year and $20 million. And I will say this, and some people can still disagree, there are no bad 1-year deals, because at least at the end of that year, you're done. There could be a lot of things bad with a 3-year, 4-year, 5-year, 10-year deal. We've seen some of those go bad, but at least 1 year, you can kind of hedge your bets and say, okay, well, that didn't work out, so now we'll go do something else. And that will probably be the case here with Ha-Seong Kim. But he got injured, hurt a finger, tore a ligament, I believe, in a finger when he fell, slipped on some ice, is going to miss spring training, does miss spring training, misses the first month and a half of the season, finally comes back in May, and just is not the same player that you saw a year ago. has not really been able to find his footing at all. Ends up on the injured list for a little while, still trying to, I think, work through some of the finger issues and, honestly, a mental break as well. That's an added bonus for the kind of start that he got off to. But in the meantime, in the interim, you had Mauricio Dubon playing a pretty good shortstop. You had Jorge Mateo. And then Jim Jarvis worked his way into this equation as well. So you've had some pretty capable, I think, defensive shortstops going on. But offensively speaking, you just haven't gotten a lot out of the position, and you certainly aren't getting the things that you kind of envisioned from Ha-Seong Kim. I was thinking a guy that could hit 250 to 260 on base around 330, hit 12, 15 home runs, maybe steal 20 bases, the things that he had done pretty much if you look at the average year in San Diego. But injuries have really sapped Ha-Seong Kim, both in 2025 and here in 2026. He just has not been part of the solution at shortstop. Now, Mauricio Dubon has played a lot of outfield. He's had a couple of issues, not to the point where I would say, okay, well, you got to stop playing Mauricio Dubon in the outfield, but there have been a couple of misplayed fly balls. There was another one on Friday. His one, he came running in. And if you've ever played the position, trust me, it's harder than it looks sometimes. You get fooled on a ball, and big leaguers get fooled less than amateurs, like yours truly. But he just made a bad play, and those things happen. Now, the Braves did not score any runs on Friday, so I'd almost say that the Mauricio Dubon play becomes irrelevant if you're unable to score. If you don't score, you don't win. But there have been a couple of those. So I will stipulate, maybe, the outfield is not the ideal thing, and I'm going to get to one of the other prongs of this discussion based on that. I think at this point, if the playoffs start tomorrow, which they don't, Mauricio Dubon's your starting shortstop. And in left field, you figure out between Mike Yastrzemski and Lane Thomas who's starting based on if you're facing a lefty or a righty. But as you look at shortstop right now, and the playoffs, again, don't start tomorrow, you're just not getting anything out of Jim Jarvis at this point, offensively speaking. He's a solid shortstop, don't get me wrong. But as you look at just the overall test that Major League Baseball is, he had some success first time through the league. Then, as more video got out, more tape got out, pitchers started to kind of figure some things out, pitch them a little differently. Maybe as a young hitter, you start to get a little bit more aggressive and you start getting yourself out. Just a few things that go into the adjustment that it takes to be successful at this level. But if you look at Jim Jarvis here lately, he did have a hit on Sunday, but he is, 3 for his last 30 in the month of August. He's got 1 walk and 8 strikeouts there. So the OPS on the year now is still well under 600. He's played 35 games. And a well under 600 OPS, well, that obviously is not ideal. But I think we're seeing that if you're looking for the guy at shortstop that's getting the regular reps, that's still a very much an open-ended discussion. And I'm curious about Ha-Seong Kim's role at this point. I've been asked about this a lot when I do call-ins here on 92.9 The Game as to what are the Braves doing with Ha-Seong Kim? What's the path here? I mean, they activated him from the injured list. They cut Jorge Mateo, and some folks were upset about that. I don't really know why. He had a couple of good weeks, one good week in particular, but otherwise, you're talking about a 220 hitter with an OPS a little bit over 600. You kind of know who Jorge Mateo is. He's fast. He's got a good arm. He played a solid shortstop. He didn't hit a lot. Does that sound familiar? Because that seems to be what the Braves have run into a lot at that position. But Ha-Seong Kim, Alex Anthopoulos did say this after the trade deadline, there have been no thoughts whatsoever of just cutting bait and moving on from him. Now, Walt Weiss has basically said, I'm going to go with whoever gives us the best chance to win a game, and we've seen a lot that's been Jim Jarvis. Occasionally, it's still Mauricio Dubon. But since Kim came off the injured list on the trade deadline, so that was August the 3rd, so we're looking at about 2 weeks now, I'm still a little bit baffled that he's just, I didn't expect him to get unlimited playing time, but the guy's played in 4 games. He's made 1 start. And I understand, look, I can look at the numbers. They're not great. But I'm also looking at the production that you're not getting basically from anybody else and just thought maybe throw him a bone once a series. Try to figure out some opportunities to get him in there just by giving the other guy a day off. Shouldn't there be something going on here? I'm just a little bit confused about it. I'm not sure I understand why not at least to try him since Jim Jarvis is not hitting at all. And you do have, and I know people hate this, and I don't think it's the only reason he's here, but it's a big reason. You did pay this guy $20 million. You just have no more curiosity? You saw a bad month in May and June. Guess what? The whole club had a bad month in June. And it's not like you are not going to play all the other guys that are veterans that have better numbers than they would have put up in the month of June. It's just, I know that Ha-Seong Kim at that time just pretty much looked lost at the plate. And maybe this is just kind of a story that's already written its end and the writing's on the wall, and that's exactly why you're seeing it the way you're seeing it. I was just curious as to why maybe not a few more here or there. And maybe that'll happen in the next 5 or 6 weeks. Because I don't think that you can keep hitting a guy that's batting 100 for the month for an unlimited amount of at-bats moving forward. I just think it's a very unique situation that the Braves have found themselves in at that spot. And the trickle-down of this is if you are playing Mauricio Dubon in the outfield and Mike Yastrzemski's not playing, didn't you go get Lane Thomas? Well, Lane Thomas has come over. He's played 8 games. He has 16 plate appearances in 2 weeks. This is a guy that, yes, he mashes lefties, but he can also hit righties. So I guess I'm saying that the answer is there. If you want to tell me Ha-Seong Kim's not it, cool. I'll take your word for it. I'm not going to argue with you. Put Mauricio Dubon at shortstop, do Lane Thomas and Mike Yastrzemski in left field, and be done with it. You have Jim Jarvis as a reserve infielder. If you got Ha-Seong Kim as a reserve infielder that you don't trust to hit at all, I guess that is what it is. But it's just a very strange rotation between those 4 players in those 2 positions. Not really Yastrzemski so much. Like, he's going to get his starts in left field. But between 2 shortstops plus Mauricio Dubon plus Lane Thomas, I just feel like there's a way to get some better at-bats out of those 2 units. Defensively speaking, it's fine at shortstop. It's not a critical issue. But I think to some point, I'm sure that just about everybody's kind of tired of hearing about the Braves not having settled shortstop. Because it's been pretty unsettled since Dansby Swanson left and signed with the Chicago Cubs. You got 1 solid year out of Orlando Arcia, and then in 24, in 25, and now again in 26, you're trying to make up for that in the aggregate, but you haven't really been able to solve that to the level that you want to. Arcia turned back into a pumpkin. Nick Allen was a great defensive player with little to no offensive impact and upside whatsoever. I just thought we were going to see something a little bit different when you got Ha-Seong Kim in, and in September he kind of gave you the idea that, all right, if you bring him back, maybe you have solved it, at least for a year. But you are continually kicking the can down the road on this, and it is a rather important spot. It's not the only important spot. I mean, if you've got a star center fielder and a star right fielder and a star first baseman and a star catcher and a star third base, like star second baseman, I get it. You got some other players who do a lot of things that allow you to kind of figure these things out, including left field, including shortstop, and at this point for the Braves, including DH, which I also think that Lane Thomas, if he's not doing anything else, why not give him some at-bats at the DH spot? Because it doesn't seem like the Braves are getting a ton out of that either. I mean, if you want to give some guys the days off and still have their bat in the lineup, yeah, it makes sense. If you want to catch Sean Murphy a little bit more, maybe let his bat start to get going by giving him more reps and more at-bats, you could DH Drake Baldwin a little bit more. There are a lot of different options. I don't manage the team. I'm not pretending to know all of the intricacies that go into managing all the people and personalities, and everybody has a different way of wanting to do it. It's kind of subjective. But it just seems like there's some meat on the bone for the Braves to try a couple of different things that could get them a little bit more production in a couple of areas as they move forward. Now, one guy they are getting some production from, and it's good to see, is Austin Riley here in the second half. Now, on this day, 2 more hits, 2 more runs scored for Austin Riley. Came into Sunday batting .274 with 6 homers and 16 runs knocked in, and OPS now approaching .850 in the second half. That sounds a lot more like Austin Riley, and that's the guy that you needed to see. But as I was looking a little bit deeper into his numbers, I don't think I had noticed this at all. Riley's batting .265 at home with 9 homers. He's knocked in 32 runs. He's got an OPS over .750. Those aren't great numbers, but they're fine. When I looked at his road numbers, he's batting .176 with only 6 home runs this year and only 26 runs knocked in and an OPS, yep, there's that again, of .582. Not great, Bob. Not what you need. And running a strikeout rate of about 31% on the road. And I don't know what that is. Now, I have to look more into the career numbers, and obviously this is not a show where I just want to pull up a whole bunch of numbers and read them to you and then go to break. But it's just, there are some baffling trends that I do see with this that just maybe I had not noticed before. But Austin Riley doing all right at home, but the road has just not been kind to him. But in the second half, more to the point, those are the numbers I would point to and say, all right, if you're wondering how the Braves third baseman is doing, the second half is a lot more encouraging than what we saw over April, May, and June. And we'll talk a little bit more about the pitching situation that's going on for the Braves as we continue along here. But I did want to hear a little bit from Walt Weiss on some of the things that have been going on for the Braves here lately, because there are some updates and some player updates, I should say, that are rather important that we do want to get into. And they are more pitching related than anything. And I think the first one that folks are definitely concerned about is the whereabouts of Spencer Schwellenbach. Now, Spencer was another guy that when you looked at the trade deadline and thought, okay, are the Braves going to deal for anybody that is going to be that top of the rotation type starter? Didn't get that deal done, but could you have somebody maybe waiting in the wings that's going to help you out? I think there was at least a pie in the sky dream that Schwellenbach might be able to factor because he was a top of the rotation starter when he got hurt a year ago. But he just has not been able to find his way back, and right now it doesn't sound like he's going to be able to find his way back to the mound anytime soon. Walt Weiss gave us an update on what's happening with Spencer Schwellenbach this week at Truist Park.
He was throwing bullpens, but he's still working through some things with his arm. So it's been an uneven road back, and this is not uncommon with guys that have missed a lot of time and pitchers that are trying to get built back up and all this. So, it's slow going for Schwelly, but he did have some bullpens under his belt, but still feeling some things. So, we're going slow.
And that is kind of unfortunate that no major setback, but if you're just not feeling 100% at this point, and we're looking at the middle of August, and you think about the other steps along the way, I mean, we'll hear a little bit more about some of these guys, and we have heard Walt Weiss talk about this throwing progression that they do. That starts on flat ground, and then you change the distances that you're throwing, and then eventually you get on the mound and you start throwing some bullpens. Then you'll face some hitters, and once you've done all of those things, then you get to go out on a rehab assignment. And if you've missed, as I check my notes here, 16 months, you're not going to go on a short rehab assignment. You're going to go out for about a month or so and try to get yourself ramped back up. But even the AAA season ends on the 21st, I believe, of September. But just doing the math on a Spencer Schwellenbach comeback, I mean, if he's not able to begin that rehab assignment within the next 10 days to 2 weeks, I just don't think it's a realistic possibility to expect him to throw in competitive games at the big league level for a variety of reasons. Number one being you're running out of time, and number two, which is really number one, you're not going to rush this guy back. Not after all the things that he has gone through. And I had somebody ask me on social media about, oh, man, it's really weird that he's missing this whole season because he got a cleanup procedure. Let's back the truck up a little bit. He's missing the season because he got a cleanup procedure that was to help correct the broken elbow that he had a year ago. This is not one thing. There are layers to this. And that, unfortunately, for Spencer Schwellenbach was a setback, but it wasn't the only thing that he had dealt with. And he talked about it, and you heard it on the show, and if you haven't, you can find it in the archives. He was unable to hit 90 miles an hour throwing his bullpen sessions and just had to shut it down and then get the elbow procedure in spring training and then try to work his way back up. It just hasn't happened, just hasn't worked out yet. But there are a lot of other pitchers that are on the board for the Braves to figure out as they look to get this rotation, the continuity it needs, and, of course, look to figure out exactly how they can get their playoff rotation aligned. We'll talk about some of that a little bit later. But coming up, we're going to turn back the clock. It was Alumni Weekend at Truist Park. I was able to catch up with some of the members of the 1991 Braves, a team that went worst to first and sent this team on the trajectory of being one of the best franchises in Major League Baseball for the last 35 years. I'll share my conversation with Marvin Freeman and Leo Mazzone coming up right here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game as From the Diamond continues with Grant McAuley.
Now, more From the Diamond with Grant McAuley.
Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer on your home today. And Window Nation. Call the pros at Window Nation at 866-90Nation. Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. We close out the weekend, and it was a big weekend over at Truist Park. The Braves and Diamondbacks wrapped up their series on Sunday. Atlanta able to salvage that finale with the win on Sunday, but it was an alumni weekend and a lot of activities, a lot of fun for fans, and obviously a great opportunity to look back on the storied history of this franchise. And for a TBS kid, which I most certainly was, growing up watching the Braves, coast to coast, you could watch the Braves wherever you were via the wonders of Ted Turner Superstation. It was kind of tough watching there for the first 12 or 15 years of that, but then in 1991, everything changed. 1991 was the year the Braves went worst to first and went to the World Series for the first of 5 times in that decade. And I had a chance to catch up with some of the members of that team. I'm going to share some of these conversations with you over the next few weeks here on the show. And one of the guys I was able to chat with was Braves reliever Marvin Freeman, one of the great personalities on that team. And when you talk about the culture of a winning club and the personalities and the competitors that you wanted out there, Marvin Freeman was one of the great many that the Braves were able to pile up. A really, really good reliever. He did get hurt late in that season, so not able to make the playoff push and able to pitch in the postseason. But Freeman and his contributions throughout the course of the year were a big part of a much-improved Braves bullpen. And as we know, a good bullpen can do a lot for you if you're contending. But here's my conversation with Braves reliever Marvin Freeman of that 1991 club as he looks back on the 35-year anniversary of the Braves going worst to first. I wanted to talk with you about a very, very special time for the Braves, and that was the 1991 season. As somebody who came into the organization around that time, you got to see a little bit of the building process, but then you got to see the success process. What was kind of the mindset for the team as you went from a club that was trying to put it all together to one that suddenly was winning and contending?
It was like night and day. When I first got over here in '90 from the Phillies, it was maybe 5,000-6,000 people in the stands. I mean, you can come to a Braves game and sit in the front row. And as a player, it wasn't a lot of pressure on you to go out there and perform because there was nobody in the stands. You could hear that one guy that was booing from the right center field bleachers. Yeah. And then to turn that around and go to 91 where it's just complete bedlam every game. We're in a pennant race from the All-Star break to the end of the season. Every game meant something. And then to kind of come out on top of that, it was like just something that's indescribable. I still get goosebumps when I think about the transition of how we turned it around from worst to first, and that's just something that'll always stand out in my mind.
Yeah, when you look at the Atlanta Braves and now where we fast forward 35 years later, come into every season with this expectation of, hey, the World Series is out in front of this team. There's a good possibility they can get there. In 1991, I'm sure that was the dream of every team, but a little bit different. So as you started to kind of build that confidence and headed into, say, the All-Star break, knowing that you were within striking distance in the NL West, were there certain guys, certain leaders, or certain coaches that started to kind of maybe instill and stoke the flames of that kind of confidence?
Well, of course, when they bring in new personnel, everybody's going to come in with their own mindset. But it was like the guys that they went out and brought in, the Pendletons, the Sid Breams. They brought in some good rookies, Dave Justice, and these guys didn't have any notion of what things were. They had an idea of how things should be. Yeah. And so when we came in, we had a different mentality of we're not going to be a doormat. If we go out here and play the game like we're supposed to, then we're going to have some positive results. And then when we start seeing those things happen, it just built momentum behind the fans. And then the fan base was incredible because they would sense in the 5th, 6th, 7th inning when it was time for us to start getting into it, getting the rally, they would start that chop. The chop was unbelievable. It's not like it is today where it's like orchestrated. It was just so organic, and it would just naturally get us like, hey, guys, it's time to go. So it was just one of those things that, was a phenomenon that I don't know if we'll be able to see something like that again in baseball, but I'm just glad I was a part of it back then.
Yeah, as a young fan growing up at that time, it just seemed like there was so much that just organically fell into place, whether it was, the player development, bringing up the right guys, bringing over the right guys, trading, signing free agents, all of those things. And then, of course, you had Bobby Cox, who moved down from the GM seat to the manager's job again. Talk to me a little bit about what Bobby meant to the club, to the culture, and to the direction that this team was heading. Because, he had put a lot of the pieces on the board, but now it was time to go out and actually move those pieces and do the winning.
Well, Bobby was the common denominator for all the players because he would put players in position to succeed, and he'll leave you in there as long as you're succeeding. Yeah. And it just kind of motivated us to know that, if I'm doing my job, then I'm going to be used. So the main thing about Bobby was that he only had a couple rules. Be on time, play hard, and anybody can do that. And if you didn't do that, they were getting you out of here. So everybody had a simple goal in mind. Be on time, play hard, and things are going to work themselves out. And if you're doing well, you're going to get a chance to contribute, and you're going to contribute a lot.
Well, the 1991 season was Braves and Dodgers for the National League West. We hear a lot about the Dodgers these days, but that was the formative rivalry, really, for the Braves to launch themselves into what has transpired over the last 3.5 decades. There was a quote, there used to be a billboard, I believe, right off downtown that said, "Atlanta will never be a baseball town." It was attributed to Darryl Strawberry, and there was a giant tomahawk that went right through the middle of it. I say all that to just kind of ask you, as the season heated up, how hot did that rivalry get?
Oh, it was hot, man. I mean, every game we would look at SportsCenter and see what they did. And if we played before them, I'm sure they were looking to see what we did. But they had this nonchalant attitude like, well, it's Atlanta. They're going to fold eventually. Mm-hmm. And then when we didn't fold, they were saying other teams weren't playing their best players because they wanted the Braves to win, which was ridiculous because we're all pro athletes and everybody's trying to win. But just, being able to sneak up on guys and not, run from them. And we're over here in the East and they're in the West. That was crazy anyway to think that those divisions were split like that. But it was always L.A. is big. L.A., big bad L.A., the Dodgers, the Braves, they're going to fall off, but we didn't, and it was just a wonderful thing to beat them guys and rub it back in their faces.
Absolutely. So the Braves, you win it on the final day of the regular season. You go for the first of 2 NLCSs against the Pittsburgh Pirates. Steve Avery made himself quite a legend in the postseason on the mound that year. And then, of course, a 7-game, what I would still call maybe the greatest World Series ever played in 1991 against the Twins. Your reflections on how that season transpired, I guess, came to an end where I always felt like, again, as a young Braves fan growing up, beautiful season, amazing World Series, but the wrong team won.
Yeah, it was kind of bittersweet for me because I ended up having back surgery in the beginning of September, so I wasn't able to participate. But being a fan and a cheerleader was probably the hardest thing that I had to do, sit back and watch and not be able to go out there and contribute. But the guys played well. That was the first time I ever seen a clubhouse of grown men crying after a game. And this was the 7th game of the World Series. But it was just, we didn't finish the job. But, man, it's something that you just can't, point out to other people how that team came together, how we were all pulling on that rope to go in the same direction, and we felt the same pain together as well. But it was a tremendous year.
Well, a year full of memories and a year that kind of ignited Braves baseball success over the last 3.5 decades. Marvin, I appreciate you sharing your memories with me. It was great talking with you, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon.
It's always nice to talk about Braves memories.
That was Marvin Freeman, a member of the 1991 Braves, a team that went from worst to first, that went to the 7th game of the World Series, a place that the franchise had not been since 1958, the last time that the Braves had appeared in the World Series. Now, one of the figures of the 90s for Braves and Braves fans, I'm sure very recognizable to the side of Bobby Cox. There was a guy that was always rocking back and forth, watching his pitchers on a nightly basis. His name was Leo Mazzone. He was the pitching coach for the Braves for a decade and a half. As I said, in 1991 was the start of something special. Tom Glavine won a Cy Young Award. Steve Avery, John Smoltz became postseason legends for this club, and Leo Mazzone was the guy that had helped develop them, and he shared some of his thoughts about that 1991 team and, of course, that great time in Atlanta Braves history. Here is former Braves pitching coach Leo Mazzone. Can you believe it's been 35 years since the 1991 team went from worst to first? You were here during some of the worst toward the tail end there. You obviously worked alongside one of the great managers we'll ever see in Bobby Cox. And just talk to me a little bit about what it was like getting from that point where you had some of the pieces in place, but assembling it to do the winning that you wanted to do.
Well, I think what happened was that when Bobby was the general manager, he put the pitching in place. In other words, all the great pitching that we had, he and the scouts drafted and developed. Thing is, he wanted to be a pitching-oriented organization, not an offensive-oriented organization, because they said people couldn't pitch in the launching pad.
Yeah.
Well, we proved that wrong.
That's right.
But the bottom line is then when John Sherholtz came in, they added the defense because you didn't have any good defense. You also had Fulton County Stadium infield. It was like a rock. So but besides home runs, you could get the ball through the infield easy. Yeah. So what they did was John went out and got defense, grew grass in the infield, and before you know it, it's all started to come together. But it really kicked in after the All-Star break. I think we were 8 games out or something like that. We won 7 or 8 in a row, and the Dodgers got swept in St. Louis or something like that. But anyway, then we were in the pennant race for the rest of the year, and it was the greatest experience to be in the city that went bananas over the Atlanta Braves in the second half of 1991. Yeah. And Bobby always told me that was his favorite year of all, period. And to see those young kids develop the way they did and then pitch under the pressure that they did and go deep into games the way they did, I mean, come on. You had Steve Avery was an 18-game winner when he was 21 years old. Smoltz was dealing, and Glav was the steady rock, and Charlie Lee Brandt, the savvy veteran. So it all came out. We projected it, but sometimes when you project something, it doesn't really happen. But the bottom line is the thing that I'm most proud of was the health of our pitching staffs. Yeah. And I took great pride in that for 15 years. So
let me ask you kind of particularly about those guys, because everybody looks back and sees John Smoltz, Tom Glavine, Greg Maddux, all Hall of Famers. However, they took some lumps in the early going. For that group, I think there's maybe just a misconception that if you're a Hall of Famer that it was always easy, but you were there. It was not always easy.
No, not at all. I mean, we went through some ups and downs, but I'll tell you the genius of Bobby Cox that most people don't know. At the end of 1990, last game of the year, Bobby told me to bring the rotation out the dugout at 2 o'clock in the afternoon before everybody got to the park. So, we had Glav and Smoltzy, Ave, Pete Smith, and Charlie.
Yeah.
He told them at 2 o'clock at the last game of the season that they were going to be the starting 5 next year.
Wow.
I don't care what you do in spring training. I don't care what the results are. You come out of spring training healthy, you 5 will take us as far as we can go. And I'm sitting there going, man, and Bobby, he was dead serious.
Yeah.
And guess what? They took us to the 7th game of the World Series.
Yeah.
And the reason John Smoltz is in the big leagues, in the Hall of Fame, I'm sorry. When he was 2-11 in 91, there was meetings like, we need to move him out of the rotation. And, of course, Bobby said, there's no way. He says, he's the best 2-11 pitcher I've ever seen. They asked me, and I said, what? You don't need to ask me. I said, I said what I said, but I said, that's crazy. And then they wanted to send Avery down before the season started in spring training. And Bobby said, you're not sending him down. He's our 4th starter. So he knew what was going on. And then they said, well, Charlie Liebrandt's getting old. Maybe he won 15 games. So the bottom line is the faith that he showed in that rotation helped them develop, and he never took them out of the rotation. In other words, we had the same routine all the time, from spring training to the 7th game of the World Series.
Yeah, and that kind of continuity makes a huge difference for a team. And as you get to those huge games in which many of these players had not experienced, Terry Pendleton had, some others had, but for the most part, everybody, as you said, got to experience this kind of for the first time, which is what made 1991 so magical. Mm-hmm. The NLCS against the Pirates, where Steve Avery pitched like he had ice water in his veins, and of course John Smoltz making his postseason legend all the way down to the 7th game with Jack Morris. As a young fan growing up, I always said that's a season that can never be replicated. It was the most classic World Series I've ever seen. Unfortunately, the wrong team won, but how did you feel when all was said and done?
I felt I was down for 24 hours, but then I felt, how great it is to be a part of this season, to be a part of this team. It's like I tell people, they hear about the scouting reports and the analytics and this and that. Steve Avery was 21 years old when we went into Pittsburgh, down 3-2. So naturally, we used to go over the lineup, the Pirates, and at no time did I ever say, you can't throw this guy this. So after we did that, I'm walking down the bullpen with Steve in Pittsburgh, and I said, Steve, you got this figured out? He goes, yeah. I said, good, tell me. He goes, I'm going to warm up, find out what I got, and pitch accordingly. That's the best scouting report I ever heard.
I'd say that worked out pretty well. That's right. Well, everything worked out all the way down the line out throughout the 90s. 1995 eventually came along, and you guys were able to win that World Series. Thanks for sharing some of the great moments, particularly of the year that it all began for Atlanta Braves baseball, becoming a contender year after year after year. I appreciate your time.
I get goosebumps thinking about it to this day. I really do. It's what an accomplishment.
Yeah,
and I sure miss Bobby Cox.
That's Leo Mazzone, and I think he speaks for all of us. It was, a difficult time this year, losing both Bobby Cox and losing Ted Turner as two of the architects, I would say, of Braves baseball becoming what it has. And, just not quite the same without knowing that Bobby's around somewhere. And for members of that team, that 1991 team, that had to be a burden that was just a little bit heavier. I'll have more of those discussions and more of those conversations, I should say, with some of the 1991 Braves to share on the show coming up, so be looking out for those. When we come back, though, we will turn our attention back to the 2026 Braves and what's going on in this pitching staff, some moving parts, and some rotational questions to answer over the coming weeks. We'll get into all of that next on From the Diamond with Grant McAuley on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
Now, back to more From the Diamond.
Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer on your home today. And Window Nation. Call the pros at Window Nation at 866-90Nation. Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back into From the Diamond with Grant McAuley here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. Braves and Diamondbacks done with their series. Now it's a road trip for the Braves, which will have 4 cities in 7 days. If that sounds busy, it's because it is. It's going to be quite the turnaround over and over and over for the Braves before they finally get back home after those 7 games. But Atlanta continues to hold on to the top record in the National League East and continues to hold on to one of the best records in Major League Baseball and in the National League in general and at large. And that's going to be tested here coming up as they face the Brewers on this road trip. That's away. And then they'll welcome the Dodgers to Truist Park right after they get home after these 7 games. So a lot of big baseball, a lot of important baseball still to come for Atlanta. We will talk about some of those series here in just a little bit. But wanted to turn the attention to the Braves rotation, which obviously has been one of the major talking points, I think, for Atlanta all year long. And the reasons are obvious because of the injuries. The injuries that the Braves have had to deal with in rotation has been a story that it just seems like every single year we are talking about that. It's always, always, always top of mind because it's hard to escape, hard to plan for and around injuries, the way that the Braves have had to and the way that most teams in baseball end up having to. If you look at Atlanta's overall work as far as the rotation is concerned this year, Atlanta's been able to, I think, hold its own a little bit better than maybe you realized. The Braves' rotational ERA, 3.76. That is 6th best rotation ERA in baseball. That's something that I think if you told people, blind taste test, start of the year, would you take that? Of course you would. Now, a lot of the heavy lifting for that ERA, and in general, is done by Chris Sale, because Chris Sale is an all-star and a Hall of Famer and a Cy Young contender. That's what he's here to do. But you look at some of the other guys that have had to fill in, they, I think, have been able to make some contributions here and there. You just weren't able to, I think, bolster the rotation the way you were hoping around the trade deadline. But that's not the discussion we're going to have, because that trade deadline and that whole topic has come and gone. That ship has sailed, as the saying would go. But the Braves, as far as their rotational ERA, if we go back and just look at from the trade deadline to this point, I think might be a little bit surprisingly better than you might have imagined. Because, again, Atlanta did not go out and make any big pickups, but their ERA, rotation-wise, is, 6th best in all of baseball, but it's 2.82 since the trade deadline. So we're not talking about a whole lot of games, just 11, make it 12 now. That ERA actually went down a little bit because of what Bryce Elder did on Sunday with 6 innings of 1-run ball. But overall, the rotation has been able to hold its own. Sure, there have been a couple of clunkers. Grant Holmes had a clunker on Saturday. That happens. Bryce Elder had one against the Mets. That also happens. But overall, you've gotten, I think, a better brand of starting pitching than you had seen maybe at any point over the first probably 2 to 3 months of the season in terms of just the overall consistent quality. And it was kind of unexpected because there was no big-name acquisition. Now, the Braves did make a trade for Tyler Mahle, who was a capable veteran starter who had been pitching pretty well for the Giants since coming back from the injured list, but the numbers didn't exactly scream, this is the kind of player that you're going to pick up that's going to change the trajectory of your rotation or your season. You just wanted to find a veteran that could add a little bit more depth to the situation. Tyler Mahle had a 5.13 ERA in his 18 starts with the Giants. He was 3-9. But he's come and made 2 starts with the Braves and has an 0.75 ERA. He's allowed 1 run on a solo homer across 12 innings with just 2 walks and 16 strikeouts. So some premium production for him. But obviously there's going to be a lot of hindsight that's involved with this kind of stuff as far as what you didn't get done at the trade deadline. And there have been several pitchers we've kind of talked about over the last couple of weeks that maybe not the best debut for their new team, but they've got 5 or 6 weeks to add to their resumes. But how about Jacob deGrom? That was the big one, right? That was the one that, hey, the Braves could get this deal done. The Rangers wanted to do it. deGrom said, hey, I've got a no-trade clause. I don't want to go anywhere, so I'm vetoing any trade out of town. And so he stayed in Texas. He went out, had a great start right after that. His second start after the trade deadline, though, triceps fatigue is what he was diagnosed with. Had to leave after, I believe, just 3 innings. Could miss his next start. They hope it's not a major thing. Doesn't seem like it is. He got some promising imaging results, and obviously nobody's rooting for anybody to get hurt. Let's just not get this twisted. But sometimes you go out to make a deal that you think is going to be the answer to everything, and weird, unexpected stuff happens. Now, Jacob deGrom's dealt with a lot of injuries. Anytime you talk about any pitcher, that injury is just a pitch away. Like, that's just kind of the way this thing goes. And not that we need to keep tabs on this thing forever, but trading for a pitcher who's either not effective or gets hurt, I think that stings even worse at the trade deadline. I mean, there's never a good time for losses. There's never a good time to pitch poorly. There's never a good time for an injury. But at the deadline where it felt like everything was heightened and you're looking for somebody to walk in and be the absolute answer to everything, well, that may not have worked out quite as well as you wanted it to. But again, Tyler Mahle has been terrific for the Braves. Bryce Elder got back on track on Sunday, 6 innings of 1-run ball against Arizona. He has been far more good than bad this season. Had that awful start against New York, which was made a lot worse by some ABS challenge issues in that inning. And I want to hear from Walt Weiss about this because there was the opportunity for a strike him out, throw him out double play that was wiped away when what looked like strike 3 was called ball 4. So the runner who was thrown out at second base was now safe. And a couple of batters later, a grand slam was hit, and a 5-run first inning was on the board against Bryce Elder. That also included an inning where there was a ground rule problem with a double. A lot of weird things went on, but the ABS thing, that feels like to me one of the blind spots for this. When a catcher is trying to throw out a runner, he doesn't have time to stop and challenge the pitch. We saw some video, and it looked like Bryce Elder actually challenged the pitch, but maybe not demonstratively enough for that challenge to go through. In either case, it didn't happen, and Walt Weiss talked about that scenario and maybe what the Braves are going to take from any future ABS challenges in which the catcher might have other things to do, like throw out a runner.
There's conversations about it. I think it's a teaching moment. There'll be a heightened sense of awareness. If something similar happens, a similar play, maybe the pitcher will be a little more demonstrative if he really believes that it was a strike. But we're not gonna change the way we handle ABS. You know, we've had plenty of conversations about ABS over the course of the season. But I think the fact remains that it's best if the catcher calls it. Now, obviously, we can make some adjustments on a play like that where the catcher is, in the act of coming out of his crouch and trying to throw out a run or stealing. So
you kind of have to learn through experience with these kinds of things, and obviously ABS, something everybody's going to have to figure out as they go along. But that was definitely a major frustration for the Braves. There's just no two ways about that. Now, also happening this past week was another great start from Martin Perez. And this has been one of the great stories for the Braves this year, in that you look at that rotation. We talked about some of the numbers and where the Braves and how the Braves stack up. And obviously you look at the Braves rotation and you can say, where would they be without Chris Sale? And the answer is in a bad spot. But you can also look at this rotation, I think, this year and say, where would they be without Martin Perez? Because all this guy has done is everything and more than you could have ever possibly asked for. Martin Perez was not some big signing in the offseason that was written about time and time again where expectations were sky high. He's a capable veteran starting pitcher who was limited to just 11 appearances last year, and he pitched all right, but he was 1-6 with the White Sox with a 3.54 ERA. He was basically coming in and going to fight to be perhaps Atlanta's fifth starter at best. And now you're sitting here in the second, going into the third week of August, and this guy's got a 2.96 ERA. He's made 19 starts for this team and is 8-6 on the season. One of his best years, if not his best year, since back in 2022 with Texas. And Martin's 35 years old. So this is a veteran pitcher who has just kind of rediscovered it here at the best possible time for Atlanta. Walt Weiss talked a little bit about what Martin Perez has meant to this starting rotation and the role he has played for this team at large.
He's right at the top of that list. Comes into spring training on a minor league deal off an injury a year ago through 50 innings, I believe. You're not sure what you're going to get from a guy like that. He's later in his career, but he's gone way above and beyond what we could have anticipated when he showed up in Northport. Yeah, so he's at the top of that list of the guys who have moved the needle for us, who maybe we weren't anticipating that happening.
Yeah, and that's an interesting way to phrase it. But the question was more or less, was Martin Perez one of the, if not the unsung hero for this club, and at least for the starting pitching staff this year? And unsung heroes obviously is an interesting category because it's just like Walt said, guys that you weren't necessarily focused on that have just come in and done great work. And that's exactly what Martin has done. Now, there are some other pieces to this rotation that have still got to get sorted out. One of those is Reynaldo Lopez, who had gone from the rotation to the bullpen, back to the rotation, was seemingly finding it, I felt like, right before about 2.5 weeks ago, having to go on the injured list with knee inflammation. Reynaldo is now, I believe, eligible to come off the IL when the Braves believe he's ready. It doesn't sound like he's going to need some kind of protracted rehab assignment because he only is going to miss basically right around the minimum of the 15 days. But Walt Weiss also provided an update on the status of Reynaldo Lopez and maybe how the Braves are looking to utilize him as they try to figure out who exactly are the 5 guys who are starting in this rotation.
Yeah, I have no idea, to be honest with you. A lot of things change between now and then. A lot of it just have to be based on where we're at that point in time. Whether we need help in a rotation or we need help out of the bullpen, time will tell. We look at him as a starter first, but like I said, be a numbers game as we get into September here with some guys in the picture. So that stuff, sometimes it sorts itself out. Sometimes we got to make some decisions, but he'll get ready with the belief in mind that he's going to be a starter.
So the update, obviously, is that he's begun throwing and thrown a bullpen and that things are trending in the right direction, and that obviously little bit more of the discussion about the role for Reynaldo Lopez. But if you start to, do the math here, you've got Chris Sale and Bryce Elder and Grant Holmes and Martin Perez, and then you've also got some other starting pitchers that could be making some turns in rotation for you, including the newly acquired Tyler Mahle. Where exactly are you going to be able to fit in Reynaldo Lopez? Also, where exactly are you going to be able to fit in A.J. Smith-Shawver when he comes back? That's the discussion that we're going to have as we continue along as well. The Braves are going to try to answer a few of these pitching questions down the stretch and, again, get that best group gassed up and ready to go for the postseason. We'll continue discussing what's going on with the Braves, their pitching staff, and also this big upcoming road trip and much more as From the Diamond with Grant McAuley continues right here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game and the Odyssey app.
Back to Grant McAuley for more From the Diamond.
Brought to you by Mark Spain Real Estate. Get a guaranteed offer on your home today. And Window Nation. Call the pros at Window Nation at 866-90Nation. Sports Radio 92.9 The Game.
Welcome back in to From the Diamond with Grant McAuley. It is Sports Radio 92.9 The Game. We're live from the Kia Studios, closing out the weekend, closing out the show as well. Braves have closed out their business at Truist Park for this homestand. They won a series against the Mets. They lost one against the Diamondbacks, and now they embark on a very interesting road trip that we'll talk a little bit more about in a moment over the next 7 days. But as we've been discussing, the Braves rotation has some questions to be answered, and some of those answers may not necessarily be on the big league roster at this moment. And that one in particular that I speak of, it's not plural really, there's just one, is A.J. Smith-Shawver. Now, this is a guy that we saw several times over the last few years, one of the highly touted arms from the Braves minor league system. He's had an opportunity to pitch at the big league level and it really appeared to be figuring some stuff out last year before he had to undergo Tommy John surgery, though he did come back in about 13 months, which is breakneck speed in return from Tommy John surgery. Let me point that out. I also, before we really dig in too far to the discussion about A.J. Smith-Shawver, I want to put that to the side for a moment. I would be remiss not to recognize the passing of Tommy John on this day. He had been battling cancer. Tommy John is a guy that I think is a fascinating player for a number of different reasons because we always talk about the surgery, the experimental surgery. Dr. Frank Jobe was the one who was on the cutting edge of that with him. It was just the opportunity to, hey, let me try to solve my elbow problem and have the opportunity to pitch in the big leagues again. And not only did he pitch in the majors again, but Tommy John, you could argue, his career after the surgery was better than the one he had before the surgery. I know this. He won 20 games, not once but twice, after Tommy John surgery. He'd never won 20 games prior to that. And this is also a guy that ended up pitching 26 years in the major leagues. He won 288 games. I would argue, just based on that, the longevity, the dominance that he had throughout the course of his career, the prime of his career, and the fact that he was the guinea pig, basically, for a surgery that now bears his name. If Jim Cott's in the Hall of Fame, how's Tommy John not in the Hall of Fame? And I'm not taking anything away from Jim Cott. He was a great pitcher for a long time, too. But you look at some of these guys, and I don't want to get off on just an absolute tangent about the Hall of Fame, but they come in all different shapes and sizes. Not everybody has the same careers. Not everybody sets the same records, reaches the same milestones. But when you talk about instrumental figures in the history of baseball, I think maybe we've been sleeping on Tommy John for a very long time for baseball's highest honor. And unfortunately, at this point, if baseball were to put him in the Hall of Fame, it would be a posthumous award. But I still think well worth the conversation about Tommy John and the Hall of Fame as well. But his passing, 700 starts in his career, 4,700 innings for Tommy John as well. I believe he threw more innings after the surgery than he threw before the surgery, which is a pretty crazy thing to think about. And he did, as a matter of fact. Won more games after the surgery, threw more innings after the surgery, and he had the surgery at 32 years old, folks. This was a guy that had quite a career. So prayers obviously out to the family and the loved ones and the friends of Tommy John who had a tremendous impact on the game of baseball. Now back to A.J. Smith-Shawver, one of the countless pitchers who has undergone Tommy John surgery. We saw him make his return a couple of weeks ago, actually probably 3-4 weeks ago now, from Tommy John surgery to the big league level, then was optioned out prior to the trade deadline because the Braves had used him as the 27th man in that doubleheader, and that meant he'd have to stay down for, I believe it was 15 days after that. And Alex Anthopoulos told me after the trade deadline, look, he's going to get a couple of starts down there. He wasn't sent down for performance. Then we're going to figure out where he fits in this. And now I think after having done the 2 starts and looked great in both of them, the question is, what do you do with A.J. Smith-Shawver at this point? Because this is not a rotation that has an obvious missing member, but who gets the innings? Who belongs in the rotation as opposed to who might get bumped into the bullpens, what you're going to have to figure out. So this is a two-parter here. Let's hear a little bit about what exactly the Braves plan to do with their rotation in regards to the return of A.J. Smith-Shawver at some point and how exactly that factors into the idea of doing a six-man rotation. That's what Walt Weiss was talking about, given that the Braves have, as of right now, at least 5 starting pitchers at the big league level.
The six-man, I think it sounds good in theory a lot, and it makes sense in theory, but you got to remember the trade-off for that. You're shorthanded in the pen now, and so you can do it for a start, but to do it for any length of time, it's nearly impossible because you can go shorthanded in the pen for maybe a night. If you're lucky, maybe 2 games. After that, you got no shot. So. On any typical night, there's going to be probably 3 guys down in the pen as it is. So the logistics of that aren't good. But I'm always in favor of popping in a 6th starter, a time through the rotation to give guys an extra day, or sometimes it just makes sense. But it's not anything you could do for any length of time.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the point you have to think about is the routine for a lot of starting pitchers. And while they have utilized the off day and the extra starter here or there, especially with regards to Chris Sale, to give him that extra day that has, I think, benefited him in all 3 of his seasons with the Braves. You can't necessarily just leave 6 starters at the big league level without having to make a move because occasionally, as we've seen, somebody gets lit up, has to leave early, then somebody's got to throw a bunch of innings out of the bullpen. And then if you don't have as many arms out of the bullpen, what kind of moves you're going to have to make there? I think it's a numbers game in terms of how many relievers most clubs like to carry now, and typically that answer is 8. The Dodgers, meanwhile, kind of have the exemption to that rule because not only do they have all of their normal pitchers, but they also have a two-way player in Shohei Ohtani, which the league has basically said, if you like two-way players, make your own. And you can have an exemption to that rule as well, but that's another story for another time. Last time out, though, on the 11th of this month, so that was 5 days ago now, against Norfolk, while pitching for Gwinnett, A.J. Smith-Shawver went 5 1/3 innings, 1 hit, no walks, 7 strikeouts for him, up to 95 pitches now. So it's not like he's not stretched out and not ready to start games. And as you look at the consistency and the continuity that I would imagine, to use that word again, you'd want to have for a pitcher coming off Tommy John surgery, I don't think you want to go through the work of stretching him all the way back out to start, then put him in the bullpen, then pitch him on an irregular basis, and then start him again, and then put him back in the bullpen. I just don't think that's the thing you want to do. So if you don't have a clear plan or a clear need for him right now, although I would argue that this could be a potential upgrade of your rotation at some point, then you kind of have to look at the player and the development of that player, or really the well-being of that player, and keep him on a regular situation here. But I'm interested to see how the Braves are going to play this. He did get a start back on the 29th, it was, against the New York Mets. That was 4 1/3 innings, 2 runs for him, 4 strikeouts for A.J. Smith-Shawver, threw 69 pitches in that one and pitched into the 5th. His first official appearance on his rehab assignment occurred for Augusta on the 30th of June. So he's only been throwing in competitive games since the very end of June. So we're only talking about 6 weeks or so on the mound. He is coming off surgery, but if you've watched him pitch here, the velocity's there, the strikeout stuff is there. He's one of the most tantalizing pieces that the Braves have potentially to add into their equation for what the right starting rotation looks like. Because if you look at how you can line up your whole pitching staff in the playoffs, you don't need your starters to come out there and go 7 innings. You're also not going to carry 5 starters. So who are the best arms? And then how do you stack those innings out of those arms? Number 1 is Chris Sale. There's no question there. Is 2 Tyler Mahle? I would argue maybe throwing a righty after throwing Sale would be beneficial rather than throwing Sale and then Martin Perez. Is it Martin Perez? Or would you rather throw A.J. Smith-Shawver? If you're in a position where you're needing somebody to come back and pitch in a potential elimination game, how exactly do you want to line all that up? I'd say, again, the answer would be Chris Sale. In a perfect world, you'd have him thrown all the most important games, the most important innings for you, but you're going to need some starting pitchers beyond him, and you're also going to need to get your bullpen completely up to speed. You've got some really, really good weapons out there. Obviously, one of those, a win today for Didier Fuentes. I know he gave up a solo homer, but this is a guy that's pitched tremendously well and become an absolute weapon out of the bullpen for the Braves. I don't think that they're going to even play the game of trying to stretch him out to start. I've been asked about that. But could he throw potentially multiple innings that would help be the bridge to get to your back end of the bullpen guys? And you do get the rest days for travel in the postseason, as long as we're not talking about the wild card. So potentially you could script out the days in which you'd want Didier Fuentes to throw multiple innings for you. Maybe it's 5 outs, maybe it's 6 outs, maybe it's 4 outs. I don't know. But if you do that, how exactly do you stack the back of the bullpen? Well, the answer to part of that is going to be, what can Robert Suarez give you? And that's been a question we've been asking quite a bit, and a question we asked to Walt Weiss. Better news for Suarez is he's begun throwing again after being shut down for a little while, after some soreness, after the All-Star break. That is kind of where he's at this point, and as long as he continues to come back in and feel good and then come in the next day and feel good, they'll allow him to continue throwing. That's flat ground for now. And then he'll need to get off a mound and face some hitters, and then obviously a rehab assignment would be in his best interest because Robert Suarez has not pitched in a big league game since the end of June. So it's been quite a while for him. But Suarez is a guy that could make a huge impact on how exactly the Braves utilize their bullpen to throw the most important innings at the most important time of the year. If you've got him back in the picture, and I know Raisel Iglesias has been a little bit shaky, and again on Sunday, he had some things going on there. Had another weird balk call. Could we go a week without having a weird balk call on a Braves pitcher at an inopportune time? But either way, you'd like to see more clean innings from Iglesias, whose velocity was also down a little bit. He doesn't have to rely completely on his fastball velocity. It's more of a pitch that he looks to set everything else up with, and really his changeup has been his number one weapon this year. But it'd be nice to have Suarez, who's also capable of closing games and has done so in some big spots in the major leagues as well. But another guy that I think, I'm not going to say we sleep on him, but we just don't talk about him a lot, is Dylan Dodd. I think if you're talking about unsung heroes for the Braves this year and you talk about Martin Perez in the rotation, it might just be Dylan Dodd in the bullpen. This is a kid who came up a couple of years ago as a starting pitcher, got knocked around, went back down to the minors, didn't pitch well in the starting role there, and then all of a sudden decided, all right, well, we can pivot here, and I can do everything I can to become a good reliever, and he's done it. He's made the adjustments to his pitch arsenal that the Braves suggested, and he's really, really done some great work for the Braves. A 2.11 ERA in 35 games this year, 40 strikeouts against just 12 walks in 38 and a third innings, and the consistency, here's another number I found. Right-hand hitters are batting 160 against Dylan Dodd. Left-hand hitters are batting 155 against Dylan Dodd, so nobody's having a good time digging in against him. He's been very effective. That's consistency. And that's one of the guys you're going to be leaning on for some of the big innings as well. Now, there is a big road trip coming up for the Braves, as we talked about. It'll begin Monday in Minnesota, where I have the bad news of telling you that despite getting up by a 5-0 score, the Phillies came back and beat the Twins by a 7-5 final. So now the Phillies are 7.5 games back. But maybe the Braves can continue the miseries of the Twins. They'll get started at 7:40 on Monday night. They'll play Tuesday and Wednesday there, that 3-game series. Then it's Thursday, the makeup game from that Chicago series from back in June. That's a 2:10 first pitch. And then they head out on Friday and will play in Milwaukee at 4:10. And then they will have that Little League Classic game as well, which will be closing out on Sunday, I believe is how that all goes. But either way, the Braves are going to be very busy. They've got 4 cities in 7 days, and then the Dodgers are going to be waiting at home for them when they get back to Truist Park. That's going to do it for this edition of From the Diamond. Thanks to my producer, Dom, as always, and thank you for all of you for tuning in, making From the Diamond part of your baseball and weekend listening regimen. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll be back next week right here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Game for From the Diamond with Grant McAuley.